Summer, 1150-something. A small village in Suffolk, England. Harvest time, the reapers are working in the fields near Woolpit when they hear something. A sound coming from the wolf pits, the deep trenches dug to trap predators that gave the village its name. They approach cautiously. The sound is clearer now. Children crying, but when they reach the edge and look down, they freeze. Two children are huddled at the bottom of the pit. A boy and a girl, perhaps 8 and 10 years old, dressed in strange clothing made of unfamiliar material, speaking a language no one has ever heard, and their skin is green, not painted, not diseased, green, the color of fresh spring leaves. Their hair, their faces, their hands, entirely, unmistakably green. The children are terrified, sobbing, clinging to each other. They will not eat. They recognize nothing the villagers offer. Not bread, not meat, not water from the well. For days they eat nothing, until someone brings them raw beans still in the pod. The children devour them desperately, as if they have never seen anything else edible in their lives. The villagers ask where they came from. The children cannot answer in English, but they point down, always down, into the earth. And when the girl finally learns enough English to tell their story, she says something that makes no sense at all. They came from a land underground, a land of perpetual twilight where the sun never shines, a land separated from this world by a great river. They were tending their father's flock when they heard the sound of bells. They followed the sound into a cave. They walked for a long time in darkness, and then they emerged here, into the blinding brightness of a world they did not know existed. This is not folklore passed down through generations. This is documented history, recorded by 2 independent chroniclers within decades of the event. One of them, William of Newburgh, investigated personally and spoke to witnesses who remembered the children, the green children of Woolpit. Real children. Documented arrival. Impossible story. What happened in that English village in the 12th century? Before we go further, you need to understand something. This story is not like most medieval legends. It is not a cautionary tale told around fires. It is not a myth that evolved over centuries. This is history. Strange history. Unexplained history. But history nonetheless. We have 2 primary sources, both written by respected chroniclers of the medieval period, both writing within living memory of the events. The first is Ralph of Coggeshall, abbot of a Cistercian monastery in Essex. He wrote his account sometime in the 1190s, perhaps 30 or 40 years after the children appeared. He states clearly that the events occurred during the reign of King Stephen, which places them between 1135 and 1154. Ralph was a careful historian. He recorded what he was told by credible witnesses. He did not embellish. He did not moralize. He simply documented something strange that happened. The second source is William of Newburgh, writing around 1200. William was even more meticulous. He investigated the story personally. He spoke to people who had seen the children with their own eyes. He was skeptical by nature. His writings show he questioned fantastic claims, yet he recorded this story as fact. 2 independent sources, both reputable, both confirming the same basic narrative. Green children appeared. They spoke an unknown language. They claimed to come from underground. This happened. What they do not tell us is how, or why, or what really explains children with green skin speaking a language that disappeared when the boy died and the girl forgot. The village of Woolpit still exists. You can visit it today. It is a quiet place in Suffolk, 30 kilometers from Bury St. Edmunds. The wolf pits are long gone, but the church where the children were baptized still stands. The land where they were found is still farmland. People in Woolpit will still tell you the story. Some believe it. Some dismiss it. But everyone knows it, because it is part of their documented history. So what happened? We are going to examine every theory, every possibility, from the mundane to the impossible. And at the end, we are still going to have questions, because some historical mysteries resist explanation no matter how much evidence we gather. If you are here because you want easy answers, you should leave now. If you are here because you want to understand what we actually know about something genuinely strange, stay. Because this is what Hinternight Stories does. We investigate what actually happened. Even when what actually happened makes no sense. Part 1. The children emerged from the wolf pit sometime during harvest season. Late summer, most likely. When the fields around Woolpit were full of reapers cutting wheat and barley, the villagers pulled them out. Two terrified children who had clearly been wandering lost for some time. Their clothing was strange, described as being made of material unlike any local fabric. Not wool, not linen, something the chroniclers could not identify, but it was their skin that stopped everyone. Green, entirely green, not sick green, not the green of jaundice or infection. The bright, vital green of living plants. They tried to communicate with the children. English, Norman French, even Latin. Nothing. The children responded in a language that sounded nothing like any tongue spoken in 12th century England. One witness described it as having sounds that English speakers could not reproduce. The children would not eat. The villagers offered bread, the staple of medieval life. The children refused it. They offered meat, cheese, fruit, ale. The children looked at these items with incomprehension, as if they had never seen food before. 4 or 5 days, the children ate nothing. They grew weaker. The villagers feared they would die. Then someone brought newly harvested beans, still in their green pods. Immediately, the children grabbed them. They tried to open the stalks rather than the pods, suggesting they had seen something similar but not identical before. Once shown how to shell them, they ate ravenously. Only raw beans. Nothing else. For months, this was their only food. Raw beans. Eventually, they began to eat other things. Bread first, then other foods. As they adapted to English diet, something strange happened. Their skin began to change color. Slowly, over the course of months, the green faded. First to a lighter shade, then to a sickly pale tone, then to something approaching normal human coloring. By the time a year had passed, you would not know they had ever been green at all. The boy adapted poorly. He remained sickly, sut, withdrawn. He died within a year of their arrival. The cause is not recorded. Perhaps disease, perhaps malnutrition, perhaps simply despair at being separated from whatever world he came from. The girl survived. She learned English. She was baptized at the village church and given the Christian name Agnes. She lived in the household of Richard de Con, a local landowner who had taken responsibility for the strange children. And once she learned enough English to communicate, she told her story. They came from a land called St. Martin's Land, a place where the sun never rose. The light was perpetual twilight, like the hour before dawn, but lasting forever. The people there were all green like them. They were Christians. She specifically mentioned St. Martin, suggesting she knew the story of the saint. But their Christianity was somehow different from the English version. Their land was separated from the sunlit world by a great river. On the other side of the river was a luminous country that could be seen from their side but never reached point. One day, she and her brother were watching their father's sheep. They heard the beautiful sound of bells. They followed the sound into a cave. They walked through darkness for a long time, and then they emerged into blinding sunlight, completely lost, unable to find their way back. The noise of the harvest reapers frightened them. They ran. They fell into the wolf pit. And that is where the villagers found them. This was her story, recorded by both Ralph of Coggeshall and William of Newburgh with only minor variations. She told it consistently. She never changed the essential details. Agnes grew up in Woolpit. According to William of Newburgh, she was rather loose and wanton in her conduct as an adult, a medieval way of saying she did not behave with the severe propriety expected of women at that time. She married. According to some accounts, she married Richard Barr, an ambassador to the royal court. Though this is disputed, she lived for many years, long enough for William of Newburgh to speak with people who knew her personally as an adult. And throughout her life, she maintained her story. She came from underground, from a world of twilight, through a cave that she could never find again. If this helps you understand how strange medieval England really was, how much mystery exists in documented history, leave a like, because we are about to examine whether any part of her story could possibly be true. So, green children speaking an unknown language appear from nowhere, claim to come from underground, and one survives to tell a consistent but impossible story. What actually happened? Let us start with the most mundane explanation and work our way toward the strange. Theory 1. The children were Flemish immigrants. During the 12th century, England had a significant Flemish population. Flemish weavers and merchants had settled across East Anglia, including areas near Woolpit. The Flemish spoke a Germanic language that would have been incomprehensible to English villagers who spoke Middle English and Norman French. In 1173, there was a massacre of Flemish settlers in a region. Hundreds were killed. Children would have been orphaned, displaced, wandering. The green skin, chlorosis, also called green sickness, a form of anemia that actually can give skin a greenish tint. It was particularly common in malnourished young girls. Lack of iron causes the green pallor. Proper diet corrects it. This theory appears to explain everything. Flemish children orphaned by violence, lost in the forest, suffering from malnutrition severe enough to cause chlorosis. They emerge near Woolpit. The villagers find them, feed them properly. The green fades as their health improves. The surviving girl creates a fantasy story about an underground world because she is traumatized and trying to make sense of her ordeal. This is the comfortable explanation. The rational explanation. The one that lets us close the book and say, mystery solved, except it does not quite work. First, the chronology is wrong. The massacre happened in 1173. But both chroniclers place the children's arrival during King Stephen's reign, which ended in 1154. That is a 20-year discrepancy. Possible that the chroniclers were mistaken, but both of them making the same error. Second, the language problem. Flemish is a Germanic language. Middle English had Germanic roots. Norman French had Latin roots. Medieval Suffolk had people who spoke both. Someone would have recognized Germanic sounds. Someone would have been able to communicate at least partially with Flemish children, but the accounts specifically state that no one could understand the children's language at all. Not even partially. It was completely foreign to everyone who heard it. Third, chlorosis does not work the way the green skin is described. Chlorosis gives a pale greenish tint to already pale skin. It does not turn you bright green like a leaf. And it affects girls almost exclusively, not boys. Yet the boy was described as being just as green as his sister. Fourth, why would traumatized Flemish children refuse all normal food? Bread was universal. Flemish children ate bread. Why would they only recognize beans? Fifth, the girl learned English quickly. Children do. But she never spoke Flemish again. She never said, "Oh, I remember now, my parents spoke Flemish." She maintained throughout her life that she came from St. Martin's Land, not Flanders. An underground twilight world. If she was making up a trauma story, why that specific story? Why not something simpler? Lost in the woods. Parents killed. Anything else? Theory 2. The children were from a lost or secret village. Perhaps somewhere in the forests of 12th century Suffolk, there was an isolated community, cut off from the outside world. Inbred to the point of genetic abnormality. Perhaps some condition caused green-tinged skin. Perhaps they ate a diet so restricted it affected their coloring. Perhaps they lived in a place with unusual lighting conditions, deep in a forest or a ravine, where they rarely saw direct sunlight. The children wandered away from this village, through caves or mine tunnels that connected to the area near Woolpit. They emerged completely lost. Their isolated upbringing meant they had never encountered normal English food or customs. Their language was not actually unique, but rather an extremely divergent local dialect that no outsider could recognize. This theory at least explains why no one could find where they came from. Secret villages do not advertise their locations. And if the community was destroyed or died out, disease, famine, violence, the children would be the only evidence it ever existed. But again, problems. 12th century England was not that big. It was not that wild. There were forests, yes, but they were actively managed. People hunted in them. Villages knew their territories. Monks traveled between monasteries. Merchants followed roads and tracks. A completely unknown, isolated community existing close enough to Woolpit that children could walk there? Unlikely, and the genetic explanation does not work. There is no known genetic condition that turns skin bright green. Blue, yes. Argyria from silver. Gray from certain conditions. But green like leaves? That does not exist in human genetics. Theory 3. The children were from a mining community. Copper mining was practiced in medieval England. Copper salts can turn skin greenish. Perhaps these children came from a family of miners who worked with copper. Perhaps they lived underground in the mines. That would explain the Twilight story. Mines have artificial light but never sunlight. Perhaps they ate a diet heavy in legumes, explaining why they only recognized beans. The unknown language? Mining communities sometimes develop their own jargon. Technical terms. Secret languages to protect mining techniques from outsiders. Except, copper poisoning that turns you green also kills you. Quickly, these children lived and thrived once they started eating properly. The boy died of illness, not poisoning. The girl lived for decades, and no mining operation keeps children underground full-time. Even in harsh medieval conditions, children came to the surface. They knew what the sun looked like. They knew what bread was. So if none of the rational explanations actually work, what are we left with? This is where we have to be honest about what we are doing. We are not here to prove the children came from a hollow earth. We are not here to claim they were aliens or fairies or time travelers. We're here to acknowledge that sometimes documented history includes events we cannot explain. And the green children of Woolpit are one of those events. Let us look at what we know for certain. Point 1. 2 children appeared near Woolpit. This is documented fact. Multiple witnesses. 2 independent chroniclers. Real people encountered these children. Point 2. The children had unusual skin coloration. Both chroniclers emphasize this. Witnesses remembered it decades later. Something about these children's appearance was striking and memorable. Point 3. The children spoke a language no one recognized. Not partially understood. Not similar to anything known. Completely foreign. Point 4. The children had extremely limited knowledge of common English foods and customs. They acted as if they had never encountered normal medieval life. Point 5. The boy died. The girl survived, learned English, integrated into local society, and told a consistent story about her origins. What we do not know is whether her story was true, false, or somewhere in between. The story itself is fascinatingly specific. St. Martin's Land. Perpetual twilight. A great river separating her world from a luminous land beyond. These are not generic fairy tale elements. This is specific geography. A map she carried in her mind. Some researchers have suggested she was describing real places through the lens of confusion and trauma. Perhaps St. Martin's Land was an actual place name in her original language. Perhaps the perpetual twilight was the northern regions during winter, where days are short and light is dim. Perhaps the Great River was a real river that isolated her community. Perhaps the luminous land beyond was just the direction south, where sunlight is stronger. Perhaps the cave was real. Suffolk has tunnels. Some natural, some man-made. Perhaps she and her brother really did get lost in a tunnel network and emerge far from home. But if that is true, where was home? And why could no one else speak her language? Other researchers have leaned into the folklore explanation. The green children were fairy changelings. Creatures from the realm of fairy who crossed into our world by accident. The green skin is the mark of the otherworldly. The unknown language is the tongue of the fair folk. The inability to eat human food is classic fairy lore. The boy dying is what happens to fairy creatures who cannot adapt to our world. This interpretation makes the story make sense within medieval belief systems. People believed in fairies. They believed the fairy realm existed alongside ours. They believed crossing between worlds was possible but dangerous. But William of Newburgh did not record this as a fairy story. He recorded it as something that happened. Something strange, yes. Something he could not explain, yes. But something real. There is a theory I find compelling not because it is true, but because it is honest about what we do not know. The children were from a real place. Somewhere isolated. Perhaps by geography. Perhaps by choice. Perhaps by disaster. They spoke a real language from a real community that no longer exists, or was so small and isolated that it left no other trace. They suffered from a real condition that gave their skin a greenish tint. Not chlorosis alone. Perhaps chlorosis combined with diet. Perhaps exposure to some substance we do not understand. Perhaps a rare genetic variant in an inbred population. Something real but unusual enough that the medieval villagers had never seen it. They really did get lost in caves or tunnels and emerge far from home. The underground journey was real. The darkness was real. The emergence into sunlight was real. But when the girl tried to describe where she came from, she lacked the vocabulary. She lacked the context. How do you explain your home to people who have never been there? How do you describe your world to people whose world is completely different? So she told them what she could. In the words she had. with the concepts she understood. And the story that emerged was strange and wonderful and impossible to verify. This theory does not answer the mystery. It reframes it. The question is not whether she came from a hollow earth. The question is, where did she really come from, and why can we not find any trace of it? Subscribe if you appreciate that we do not pretend to have all the answers. Because sometimes the honest thing to say is, we do not know. The green children of Woolpit left almost no physical evidence, no artifacts, no graves we can DNA test. The boy died and was buried somewhere in Woolpit, but the exact location is lost. Agnes lived and died somewhere in Suffolk, but we do not know where she is buried. All we have are the words. Ralph of Coggeshall, writing decades after the event. William of Newburgh investigating even later, but more carefully. Both recording a story that made no sense then and makes no sense now. But here is what we can say: something happened in 12th century Suffolk. Two children appeared who were different enough from anyone the villagers had ever seen that their arrival was recorded by serious historians. Not as legend, not as entertainment, as news, as a strange event worthy of documentation. The children were real. The witnesses were real. The testimony is real. The explanation remains elusive. Every rational theory has problems. Every supernatural theory requires belief over evidence. Every middle ground theory leaves questions unanswered. Perhaps that is the point. Medieval England was not the dark age we sometimes imagine. It had roads, trade, communication, record-keeping. It was a connected world where news traveled and strange events were investigated. When something truly unusual happened, people noticed. People asked questions. People wrote it down. And yet, even in that connected world, children could appear from nowhere speaking an unknown language with green skin and a story about living underground. And no one could definitively say where they came from. This tells us something important about history, about how much we do not know, about how much is lost, about how many communities, languages, peoples have vanished, leaving only traces so faint we cannot reconstruct who they were. Agnes grew up. She married. She lived what appears to have been a fairly normal adult life for a woman of her class and era. She died. Her story died with her. All that remains is the record. And the mystery: did she come from an isolated village destroyed by war or disease? Probably. Was she Flemish? Maybe, though the timeline does not quite work. Was she the victim of trauma who created a comforting fantasy? Possibly. Or did she come from exactly where she said she came from? A place that existed in 12th century Suffolk but left no trace except her testimony. We will never know. The green children of Woolpit are a reminder that history is not a closed book, that we have not figured everything out, that there are events recorded by credible witnesses that resist every attempt at explanation. They are also a reminder that the world has always been stranger than we think, that extraordinary things happen, that sometimes children with green skin really do appear from nowhere speaking languages no one has heard, and sometimes they tell you they came from underground, from a land of twilight, through a cave they can never find again. Whether you believe them or not is less important than acknowledging that they existed, that they were here, that they had their own truth. Even if we can never verify it, the mystery of Woolpit remains, not because we have failed to solve it, but because some mysteries are not meant to be solved. They are meant to remind us how little we truly understand about the world and the people who have lived in it. Agnes of Woolpit took her secrets to the grave, but she left us something valuable: the knowledge that even in documented history, there is room for wonder, for questions, for the unexplained. Share this if you believe history should include the mysteries, not just the explanations. Because the green children of Woolpit are part of England's history, whether they came from an underground world or a forgotten village or somewhere else entirely, they were here. They were real. They were documented, and we still do not know where they came from.